All right. Hi, everybody. It's our CFB Talk 160. It is Tuesday night. This is when we like to talk to you about whatever you'd like to talk about in college football. Every week that passes, more interesting stories, and it just builds on itself, and it gets more exciting, and it gets more interesting. So I just fired off that tweet. We'd love to hear from you. You can just hit request from the Twitter app, and I'll be happy to let you up and hear what your thoughts are. My name is Bobak Hayeri. I'm here with RCFB. This is our live Tuesday night conversation with you. Let's see. I see John wants to join us. I'll go ahead and let him up. Just there's always little stories here and there that I always like to bring up at some point or another. One of the more interesting ones is the ongoing saga of Michael Oher and the couple that he fostered, or at least that took care of him in high school. The Blindside story. The judge said he's ending that conservatorship between him and those parents, and then really what author Michael Lewis, who wrote the book The Blind Side, as well as other good books, Moneyball. He just wrote that, I guess, a new book about the FTX guy, Sam Bankman-Fried. But he said something kind of alarming. He basically said, what we're watching is a change of behavior. This is what happens when football players get hit on the head. They run into problems with violence and aggression. That comment, honestly, it seems really ridiculous. It seems a bit of a low blow. I mean, it's basically, I know it's been quoted on our CFB. Some folks are basically like, author Michael Lewis is saying, well, he didn't have a problem with anything before, so he must have CTE with something. And for those who've been kind of paying attention to that story over the Blindside, saga, I think he was just tired of realizing that perhaps he wasn't getting the full benefits of the financial relationship that were being managed for him. And it should be noted that Lewis did take some financial advantage of that book and the relationship with the family for speaking tours and all of that. So it's an ugly situation, and it's just weird to see it. So that's one of those oddball stories that's been kind of floating in the news that I just wanted to mention. And John, I know you're patient with me, so give me 1 second. The other interesting story on a lighter note, or a more relevant note, somehow, despite the big loss to Oregon the week before, USC Colorado was the highest rated game of the week again, with 7.2 million viewers. Georgia Auburn was 6.3, followed by Notre Dame Duke, Michigan Nebraska, LSU Ole Miss, all the usual suspects. Good news or bad news, depending on where you are. Deion's about to find out what it's like to be in the Pac-12, because good luck finding the Arizona State game. It's going to be on the Pac-12 network, and most of us don't have it either. So if the ratings somehow manage to break into the top 10 for a Pac-12 network game with Deion on it, then oh my goodness, just give him as much money as he wants, because that would be a miracle. And of course, a season too late for the conference. John, what's going on? You've been patient. What's on your mind?
Hey, Bob. How you doing tonight?
Oop, I'm having some technical difficulties. John, do you mind just dropping off, and I'll let you right back up?
Yep.
Sorry about that. Sometimes I get technical difficulties on my end because I couldn't hear anything, and I know he might very well be speaking, and then that just sort of happens. But we'll get him up here again. So as I'm kind of going through this, as we were just talking about the ratings, it looks like, Travis Hunter with Colorado, since Colorado was number one in the ratings this week and certainly won't be next week. Apparently, Travis Hunter is going to be out for 2 to 3 more weeks after getting injured during that Arizona State and Stanford game. So that's a shame. Hopefully he'll get back there, because he was an exciting player to watch. Adidas has signed a pair of Washington players, Michael Penix Jr., their superstar quarterback, and Rome Odunze, the great wide receiver they have, as their first. Apparently, it's the first time Adidas has ever signed NIL athletes. It's very conspicuous because, of course, the next big game on the 14th is going to be against Nike U, when the rivals Washington and Oregon square off against each other. So the fact that it seems to be conspicuous that they signed their first 2 players against, again, it's going to be a showcase with Nike. Hey, John, I know. Thank you for your patience. Go ahead and unmute. Sorry about that. That was a headache on my side.
Hey, no problem.
Oh, I can hear you perfectly. And it could have been on my side, but all I know is I can hear you great now.
Oh, man, that's all that matters now. How you doing tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
Not bad, man. I just I just moved and had to be a part of a wedding within the same week, and I tell you what, I would never recommend anyone to do that in their lives. That's gonna be a one-time deal.
Did you get a chance to see any college football this weekend, or was it just crushed by
No,
all of that?
no, all my hopes and dreams of seeing college football this week was completely crushed. um, but yeah, so my question for tonight, and or just for yourself, now that we're several weeks in, the amount of undefeated teams are now really dwindling. Shout out to Harvard though. I'm curious what you think outside of the top 10. What undefeated team you think has the best chance of making a run at a series at the very worst a New Year's Six bowl or maybe even a playoff spot?
That's a good question. So and it's interesting because a playoff spot, I think, is a different group of teams than necessarily the ones who I would say might have a shot at a New Year's Six. Because with the New Year's Six, again, no disrespect for the G5, but there's no Cincinnati like candidate this year. I don't think anyone's expecting any of those programs to make a run for it. Now, in terms of a team that could surprise its way, because I mean, there's teams that won't surprise their way. At this point, any of those three Big Ten teams. I mean, again, I'll set aside Maryland for a second because that's going to be one of the candidates. But I mean, obviously, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, Texas, Oklahoma, whoever wins that one, Florida State, even to an extent, those are teams I don't think anyone would be shocked. USC or whoever comes out of the Pac-12, obviously Washington and Oregon. Now, of the more unexpected teams, I mean, I kind of still put North Carolina in that category, and I don't know if they can make it through. I think that would be a shock. But at the same time, I'm thinking about who else I would pick. Louisville, I really don't know what to make of. I mean, I'm glad they broke into the rankings because they seem to have been putting up a decent. I mean, against mid range and bad teams, they seem to be delivering. Another team that might be kind of an outlandish one, but is undefeated and towards the latter half of the season, we'll probably start talking about them more. Is Miami. I don't know if they have enough to win out, but they certainly we're going to start to hear that Miami kind of hype train, the same thing that USC gets or Texas gets. And obviously Texas is total. I mean, I'm not saying Texas is not legit, but I'm saying historically it would be like once those teams get rolling, suddenly people would pay more attention. In 2 weeks, again, the 14th is great. There's going to be good games this weekend, but the 14th has a couple of really interesting marquee matchups. And one of them is going to be Miami at North Carolina. We're going to assume Miami's going to take care of Georgia Tech because Bowling Green certainly had no problems with them. And we'll assume North Carolina can get to that game. But I mean, at that point, between again, North Carolina faces Syracuse, but between Miami and North Carolina, that would be an interesting kind of like no one saw them coming playoff run. But in terms of just New Year's Six, I mean, that opens up to a lot of teams. I'd be curious to see who rises up from G5. Is it going to be is Tulane? I mean, they have one loss. It was to Ole Miss, and gosh, Ole Miss, despite that Alabama loss, looked really good against LSU, and it looks like they might be just kind of they might just be terrorizing teams in the SEC and maybe not winning at all, but being good enough to not be a bad loss for Tulane. But also, you've got Air Force and Fresno State and Wyoming to an outside chance in the Mountain West. So any of those teams would also be interesting kind of New Year's Six categories. Because again, Wyoming does have a loss, but it's to Texas, and they put up a decent enough fight against Texas. I mean, and Texas each week seems to be improving. So those would be also some teams I would consider out there. And Mizzou, Mizzou is also out there too. They're also mysterious because Mizzou and Kentucky, pardon me, are the two SEC teams where I want to still see them keep playing and still doing what they're doing. But gosh, Mizzou's fun to watch. Mizzou's great. I love that quarterback. I love the they are proof of how good their NIL rules have benefited them because they changed the NIL laws in the offseason in the state of Missouri to basically be the front of all NIL rules that benefits any in-state high school players going to an in-state university, which in FBS is just Mizzou. And look at the recruits they've been pulling in. Look at the immediate effect it's been having. So they're also exciting to me. So it'll be interesting to see who comes out. I mean, some of these teams I mentioned are going to lose. Some of them are probably going to fall apart, and we're going to laugh that they even got as far as they did. But at this point, those are the interesting ones. Oh, and one more. I mean, before I get, I am not Pat McAfee. I have nothing against Wazoo. They are also out there too as a potential, outside playoff contender as well. And certainly we'll see where they take it. They're the team that people want to love right now because of the entire Pac-2 experience. I see we have a couple of other folks who want to talk, but John, go ahead. I know you had something you wanted to follow up.
Yeah, so the reason I asked is because I was looking at the list of the remaining undefeated teams, really wondering outside that top 10 who had the best chance of really jumping in and making a mid to late season run. I really do think it's between North Carolina and Washington State. I mean, both of them have really played well in the non conference and now in beginning their conference schedules as well. I'm really curious about how both those teams finish up. Both those teams are really talented, and of course it's pretty up. I think it's definitely uphill for Washington State, but I think if there's anyone that could really I think make that run from this point forward, I think it's one of those two teams.
Yeah, if Wazoo wins out, they'll have road wins at Oregon and Washington, which would give them a very impressive resume that would certainly put them there. And of course they miss USC, but who knows if USC is a paper tiger or not on defense. We've all seen it. It is a complete basket of. I mean, the scary thing is it's better, but again, we're starting from where we were before. Let's see here. I see we have a couple of other folks who want to join in. James, I saw you up first, so I'm going to add James Walker, and we'll go from there. But yeah, James, what's going on? What's on your mind? Thanks for your
Hey,
patience.
yeah. So I've been following Missouri football since 1998. That was back in the day when I was a kid, watching going to Missouri football games. So I I've been watching this team pretty darn closely, and I will say that I while I liked the Gary Pinkel teams in a lot of ways, the 2007 team kind of comes to
Oh yeah,
mind when it had all those tight ends and wide receivers and all that stuff, and they had a great quarterback. I really do think in a lot of ways this team and the 2013 team kind of resemble a lot of that because they were just so clean and um, they were just so clean and on the offensive side of the ball that you could really kind of determine that they're just going to run a big play and they're just going to score continuously. And Missouri, for all the talk that Missouri's had, played an easy schedule. I mean, you look at South Dakota, they beat North Dakota State. Memphis just beat Boise State, and then Kansas State. They were just the Big 12 champs last year, and they brought a lot
yeah,
of their
I
good football
agree with you on
players.
that. I just want to say that I want to say I completely agree. I think no one can point any fingers at if it's Memphis. I agree. First of all, Memphis seems like again, if their only losses to Mizzou and they win out, they're also a New Year's Six contender because there is no real clear path. I think it's at this point in the American, they are the strongest team with the strong. I'm pardon me, them and Tulane, and actually again they're playing they after on the 13th, so that's going to be a real decider in that conference. So I think that close game to Memphis at this point, I would just put a weight on that and see how they develop up. But I agree because
Yeah.
K State, that was a huge win. South Dakota again, FCS. Oh, okay, well, la di da. People can't point fingers on that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean,
Yeah.
as long as I'm really excited to see against LSU because both offense and defense are going to have some real opportunities, especially if we see the LSU defense that showed up this last weekend.
Well,
But
I do think that you bring this up, but Missouri's defense, while their pass defense isn't the strongest, their run defense is still really, really good. I believe up until the last game, they were one of only three teams in college football, Oklahoma and Iowa, to not give up a rushing touchdown this year. And then we gave up that rushing touchdown early in the first quarter against Vanderbilt. But it's still a really great rushing defense. I mean, I think they've given up 74.8 yards a game, which is incredibly insane. And the pass defense, even though it's not necessarily the strongest, I will say just gives up, some yards towards the end. And it's kind of like it's like the basketball team that just gives up a few 3 pointers here and there to kind of make the score relatively closer than what it really was. So, you just have that kind of defense there, but it's in no way, shape, or form like LSU's defense, which gives up
Yeah.
429 yards a game.
And with Brady Cook and Luther Burden on the other side of the ball, you just need to be a good defense. You don't have to be the best defense in the universe to get pretty far. And I think that's something I'm really curious to see how that performs against LSU. That's going to be a real opportunity to see where Mizzou is going to land this season. And yeah, I think you're right. I think it's going to be interesting to see how the defense can hopefully force if for the sake of the Tigers. Well, sorry, for the sake of Mizzou, force LSU to be a little more one-dimensional on that offense, and that would be very interesting to see for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll see you later.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and move over to Colts 2026 Super Bowl champions. That's always fun. But yeah, love to hear from you. There's so much going on in college football. Again, you can always hit request. We'd like to hear from you. What's up, Colts?
Hey, what's up, man? How are we doing?
Good.
Okay, so let's say, hypothetically, Oklahoma goes in this Texas game, wins by 10, maybe more. Like a convincing win, which I'm not sure if that's going to happen or not.
Yeah, if it's going to be, I would expect more. If they manage to pull it off, it would be close. And I'm not saying Oklahoma couldn't do it, but yeah. But go ahead. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I don't think we will win convincingly. But if we can, the Big 12, with how trash I feel like it's been this year, if Oklahoma goes on to drop one of these later season games, which we are notorious for doing, it's like just going through the schedule, I see BYU in Provo. That's a game I could see us losing. Jalen Daniels, when he's healthy, going up to Lawrence. That's a game I could see us dropping. One loss Oklahoma team with a good win over Texas, but dropping a game in the Big 12 with how down it's been this year. What do you think Oklahoma's chances of being able to make a playoff, especially with how good the Pac-12s looked?
Yeah.
And just how deep some of these teams are.
I see where you're coming from there, because you're right. This has been an odd year because, for example, the SEC used to be the one that could rely on perhaps a second team getting in, and this season's so wide open. I don't know. It could happen. With the questionable play from so many conferences, and other than the Pac-12, which could very well cannibalize itself. I am so hesitant. They are strong. They look strong, but the Pac-12 could just go back to being the Pac-12 and everyone could lose at least one game or two against each other. But you're right. If Oklahoma can, well, first of all, again, any win against Texas doesn't have to be convincing. Is going to be convincing enough. I mean, Texas right now seems to be, I know they're ranked number 3 in the AP. I mean, the voters, the 400, or I don't know how many voters we have in the CFB poll, put them as number 1. I mean, there's the top 4 or top 3 teams seem to be pretty interchangeable with throwing Michigan into that mix. But if they manage to unseat Texas, they're going to be in the pole position. They're going to have proven themselves. It doesn't mean if it's 1 point or 10 points, that'll be more than enough. But I can see that if Texas then wins out and OU drops another game, that will probably help them a lot. But again, looking at the teams that are left, what's the strongest team left? You're right, BYU. That one, BYU seems to be, of the newcomers, the most ready to play. They were the ones that seem to be that at least have that physicality, whereas Cincinnati and UCF, that Baylor game was just a brutal one to watch. And Houston have been a little bit on the iffier side, but that game at BYU, and then oddly enough, if things keep swinging their way, West Virginia is surprisingly decent. They're actually one of those weird outliers that, I know that's been popular to kind of talk about, that Neil Brown seems to have saved his own job. And we'll still see. You can lose a few more games or lose many more games in this season, but I could see if OU were to do that somehow. I'm not saying somehow. If they beat Texas and then manage to drop one, with how weak some of the conferences are, and especially with kind of the letdown we've had among some of the Big 12 teams, that could hurt them. And then oddly enough, if Texas continues to win out, and their only losses to OU, I could see them bumping back up into that conversation too, just because they've impressed so many people with how complete they are. And I don't know if that's entirely fair, and I hate saying it that way, but I could see that scenario with a one-loss Texas getting in if OU manages to beat Texas, but then drops one themselves.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. I mean, I think at that point, it really just, I mean, it'd be a rematch in the Big 12 championship. I just know from the years of watching OU, like, and I'm also putting the horse ahead of the wagon, saying, "Oh, what if we beat Texas?" Because that's obviously going to be way easier said than done. But it, it, if we can beat Texas, I feel like it's almost confirmed that we are going to drop one of these games that we shouldn't. And I didn't even think about West Virginia. I haven't watched a West Virginia game this year, but I'll have to look and see how they've been
Yeah,
doing.
they've been happily being in the background because they lost an opening game to Penn State. Penn State ended up being is so far looked incredible. So that they've quietly been just taking games and moving forward. I don't know if they're going to necessarily. They're capable of surprising people. I think that's where I would put West Virginia. Beyond that, I don't think I'm going to give. That would be offering a little bit too much credit. But as far as where they were looking at heading into the season, it's a whole lot better for Neil Brown. I want to go ahead and let up at least a couple more people. Let's see here. Backseat Illini. I'll go ahead and have you up here as well. And we'll get to you. So Backseat Illini, what is going on with you? Good.
So I just decided to pop in because an interesting development that happened tonight. Memorial Stadium in Champaign caught fire.
Oh no. Hopefully nothing serious.
What happened is a UTV in the horseshoe of the stadium caught fire, proceeded to spread to a lawnmower, and since plastic burning causes a lot of smoke, giant smoke plume set off the fire alarms in multiple buildings, and not really much else apart from that. They can't really give us any updates as to whether or not the game will happen this upcoming Friday, so we're just going to figure it out by then.
I just took a quick glance. So far, apparently, only the utility terrain vehicle and the mower were damaged. So that's not bad. I'm sure if there's any damage to turf, those guys are pros at fixing that or patching it up. They'll bring that guy from that one Big Ten
Oh God,
title
yeah,
game. Remember,
the
they had the guy
Ohio
with the
State
sewing
Wisconsin
machine.
game, was it?
Yeah, they'll have the guy with like a industrial patching equipment or a sewing machine go out there. But yeah, that's I just thank you for giving us a heads up. I mean that I don't know if that's symbolic of where the Illini are feeling after that Purdue game, but hopefully they can get their groove back with Nebraska because Nebraska, boy, that's going to be an interesting square off to see which team is going to have at least an upper. Well, at this point, I don't know. Maybe do we completely write off Nebraska this season?
I
I
have no
mean,
idea. I honestly, even with all of that out of the picture, I just think this is extremely ironic as October 4th was supposed to be the 34th anniversary of last time the turf caught fire.
what really?
Yep.
So this is like an anniversary. Do they celebrate it?
No, but the last time that Memorial Stadium had any fire of any sort was October 4th, 1989.
Man, this is some of the best trivia I've ever heard. I did not know that, and it's great that you knew that. Well, hopefully the game happens this weekend with Nebraska, and we'll get a better sense of which team at least can get to 3-3, and then hopefully make a play for a couple of more wins. I think both of them have plausible ways because I think you got Indiana, you got Northwestern, and then possibility of stealing. Minnesota is so questionable right now. It could
We
be
could
them.
steal Iowa as well because Cade McNamara is out for the rest of
Oh
the season.
yes, that was one of the sadder newses. Yeah, Cade's out for the rest of the season, so Iowa's going to be going with the backup QB, the sophomore.
Deacon
Um,
Hill, yeah.
yeah, that's brutal for them. I feel bad for that young man, and I don't want to. Yeah, I'm not even going to turn that into the Brian Ferentz thing. That just stinks for that young guy. So they're
Yeah.
all young to me. I'm in my 40s, but yeah, I feel bad for that. So thanks for mentioning that because that was one of those topics I actually wanted to mention, only because that's a tough one for Iowa and a tough one for him. But thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it, man.
No problem.
All right, let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and go to TriStar, and then I'll try to get to everybody. Thank you for your patience as you wait to come up. So let's see here. TriStar, what's going on?
What's going on?
Pretty good, pretty good. It's fun. It's the middle of the season. It's always fun to talk college
Oh
football.
yeah, of course. My Tennessee Volunteers are on a bye week this week, and I'll say this. I'm starting to think that maybe Tennessee just played bad in that Florida game. Like, Florida got up for it, and for some weird reason we just can't win down there. And
Yeah, absolutely. That's
and
the
the
thing.
thing
Like,
is
was it just
too,
rivalry
yes,
voodoo?
and two, a lot of people maybe they didn't pay attention was we were missing two starting offensive linemen down there. We had a guy playing center who'd never played center. We had a guy playing right tackle who'd never played right tackle, and Florida just took advantage of it. And now we got those guys back. And if you go back and watch that South Carolina game, Tennessee looks like a totally different team. So I'm just laughing at everybody that's written off Tennessee like, oh, they're gonna go 7-5. I'm like, I'm telling you, like for one, I'm not sold on A&M. I know that's who we play next in 2 weeks or a week and a half because they play Alabama this week. Not only am I taking Alabama to win, I'm taking them to cover because I just don't trust A&M. I mean, they've been in this situation how many times where they get all this hype because
Yep.
they got high end talent, but at some point you got to show something. I mean, again, and here's the thing too. I think what that showed against South Carolina is that Joe Milton does not have to go out there and be Hendon Hooker. He doesn't go out there and he doesn't have to put the team on his back. He doesn't have to go out here and be Superman. It might sound crazy with a Josh Heupel offense, but maybe he'll be best suited to be more of like a game manager. I know it sounds crazy, but a guy that where lean on your run game because our run game is phenomenal right now. Like we have one of the best rushing attacks in the country right now, and our defense is playing a lot better than what it did last year. So, in the words of Paul Heyman, why not accentuate your positives and hide your negatives? If you see that Joe is having trouble, don't make him throw it 40 times a game. You know,
Yeah, Jalen Wright's solid. Jalen Wright is absolutely a great
the
running back.
best one is Dylan Sampson. He's the best running back. He's number 6.
Hmm.
And like I said, I still have high hopes for this season and seeing how the rest of the SEC is looking. And I know Kentucky went out there and they dominated Florida and stuff. Ray Davis looked like a beast out there. But again, that's another team. I'm not buying their hype. I'm not buying Missouri's hype because I know Missouri, they're 5-0, but the toughest team they played was Kansas State, who nothing against the fine people there in Manhattan, but they're nowhere near the team what they had last year. They lost Deuce Vaughn, they lost a lot of players off that Big 12 championship team last year, and I'm not really sold on Missouri. Their defense is nowhere near as good as what it was last year. Like they're at the bottom of several defensive categories, and I think I'll tell you what, whatever the over is on that Missouri LSU game, take the over.
Yeah, that one seems like it's going to be high powered. I want to ask you something since it's going to be a bye week for Tennessee. What game has got your attention this
Well,
weekend?
probably the most is because it's our next two opponents is Texas A&M Alabama. Because we play Texas A&M at home and then we go to Alabama.
Yeah, that makes sense. What do you think? Who do you think has got the edge in that matchup? You going with Bama?
Yeah. Like I said, I'm taking Alabama not just to win, but to cover. Because again, until I see A&M prove it to me that they can go out there and have a good offensive production game against a non, you know, a halfway good team. Because if you think about it, the best team they played so far was Miami, and Miami just destroyed them. You know, so
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly why now we're wondering how good is Miami? And we'll know in maybe a couple of weeks when they play against North Carolina. But we're still, even though we're 5 weeks in, it's still that mystery.
yeah,
It's still that
exactly. So again, people do not write off Tennessee. They're far from out of it. And the way the schedule sets up, it sets up very well. Like I said, we get A&M at home. And you think about it, like I said, how Tennessee came out and they dominated South Carolina by way of a team that took Georgia to the wire just a week or two prior. Spencer Rattler had been lighting everybody up, and he only had 160 passing yards and no touchdowns and a pick six against what was presumed to be a bad secondary. But I know you can't use transit property in college football. It's all about matchups. But again, I still feel very well about my Tennessee team. I think we're going to finish strong. I think that Florida game was kind of a wake up call. Or as my buddy the sports block, he's a Georgia guy. He says maybe that was y'all's smelling salt game. I asked him, I said, smelling salt game? He said, yeah, like, like when you're lifting heavy, for any you power lifters out there, when you lift heavy or something like that, you hit the smelling salts and it wakes you up.
I like that. That's a good one.
Yeah, so I'm telling you, buy stock in Tennessee now while they're not being heavily viewed.
I appreciate it, TriStar. Thank you. And that's interesting. And I'm really looking forward in a couple of weeks seeing how they square up against A&M. Because you're right. Yeah, absolutely. That is the rest of this. The rest of this month is going to be a challenge with A&M and then at Alabama, and depending on how strong Kentucky continues to look, that's going to be a really good benchmark for Tennessee. And I think you're right. I think counting them out is foolish at this point. The SEC is just simply wide
Yeah,
open.
it's
I mean,
absolutely wide open both divisions, unless you're a Arkansas, a
or
Mississippi
Vandy.
State, or a
Okay.
Vanderbilt. To me, it's wide open. Now,
Yeah.
I think Florida just got up for the Tennessee game because it's that whole thing. They don't lose to Tennessee at home, and that was basically to save Billy Napier's ass.
Yeah. Maybe good for the long run then, if you're a Tennessee fan,
Yeah.
depending on what you think and how he's doing there.
Well,
But
as we like to say, Sunbelt Billy don't know what he's doing. He's in over his head.
oh my goodness. Well, thank you, TriStar. It was great hearing from you, man.
Absolutely. And
Thank
Georgia
you.
Tech and Tulane's come back to the SEC.
Yeah, that would be fun. Oh my goodness. Well, let's see here. I'm gonna go to Andy and then yeah, boy Ron, and I promise I'll get to everyone who wants to talk. I'm gonna go ahead and let up Andy. That one kind of I just want to play off of that last TriStar's last comment, which Tulane and joking about returning Tulane and Georgia Tech to the SEC. But one of those stories that's been kind of floating around this week is rumors again heating up around the ACC. There was a tweet by someone in that kind of ACC sphere that a Clemson senior administrator said, stay very tuned about a potential Clemson ACC departure, that where they might leave and they may have found a way or an approach to tackle that grant of rights that has been locking the ACC into a happy marriage. Florida State, for those who remember in the offseason, were the loudest about it during Board of Regents meetings or trustees, again, I forget what they use at Florida State. The president of the school, the AD, basically said, we want to get out of this conference because we're not making as much as Vanderbilt is. And over the next, I think it's like 2036 until I believe they get out of it. They said it's going to be like death of a thousand cuts because every year those other teams are going to be getting more money. And over time, a program like an FSU wouldn't be able to catch up. So it's starting to sound like Clemson and FSU. And actually, through some of the other reports, it sounds like they want to make it a play where multiple teams strengthen numbers, according to the Post and Career in an article on this. So it implies that it's not just Florida State, but possibly North Carolina, and maybe a Miami, or maybe hey, thanks for sharing that, TriStar, or maybe Miami, or maybe potentially another Virginia has been brought up, although this hasn't been a great season for them, and perhaps we'll see some of those departures because they were especially upset to see Southern Methodist, Cal, and Stanford join, and North Carolina's went ahead and gave a public rebuke to that. So it seems to be that there may be some smoke there. People are saying October, but it's still very rumored. And sometimes these rumors last for a long time. But I don't think it would be a shock if we see some departures from the ACC. If not this season, next year, I wouldn't be surprised. Part of the goal, and frankly, adding teams, the 3 teams they added, was the thought that it keeps them past a certain membership number if they lose teams, and that forces their existing media deal to stay in force because it's based on the number of teams, not which teams are in the ACC. On a lighter note, someone joked that watch Clemson and FSU leave to join the Pac-2. So it's like Beavers, Cougars, Tigers, and Seminoles. I'm not sure, but let's see here. TriStar, you wanted to add something really quick. I'll let you because you added that tweet to the top of the talk.
Okay. See, basically, I went and created, in my opinion, how it should be lined up, and it makes it better for everybody. And this creates a lot of good things. For one, college football is best when it's regional and you've got your rivalries and stuff like that. Because a lot of people don't realize, people are just thinking of the TV and TV rights. These are still college students with college classes. I come from a family that has played sports at Tennessee and, has been college athletes and, they've been there. And I've talked to them about this and they really like this. And it's 8 conferences and you basically have an 18 playoff with your conference champions. And it's all set up based on your region, like where you are in your history, like who you got history with and all that stuff. So that way it's taking that in consideration. And if you have it set up like that, then it keeps the regular season, which is what drives college football with what it is. It keeps the regular season with that vital importance to where every game matters. Not like, oh, well, you can go 9-3 and suck, and we'll still backdoor our way in. That way, you have to win your conference, and it's basically saying like, if you don't win your conference, you don't get in. And that way, so if you say have a 2011 situation with Alabama LSU, or countless times in the playoff era where a conference champion got left out, but they would put in 2 non-champions because they were the most deserving or whatever. Is so that way it's a very cut and dry, and that way the conferences aren't too big. And all of them except the SEC, because in my opinion, the SEC is the only one that can kind of pull it off. All of them are 10 teams. The SEC's got 12, because in my opinion, it's the only one, like I said, that can, pull that off. And I want to get y'all's opinion on that. And like I said, just look at all 8 of them and kind of who's in there and tell me that would not work. And thank you.
Absolutely. I welcome any of you listening who want to give some feedback on it. To take a look at that tweet. You put it at the top, and you can reply there and give them feedback on what you think. Andy, you've been super patient. What's going on, man? Oh, let's see. Just got to hit unmute if you're there. It's in the bottom left. There you go. Oh, on my end, I'm having a technical issue. Andy, I'm going to put you off, and then I'm going to have you come right back up. I've noticed sometimes it's on my end. You're probably talking, and I can't hear it. So, Andy, if you hear me, just go ahead and add yourself again, and I will get you up here. And all apologies. That's a technical glitch on me. We had an issue with John earlier, and we got him talking. So let's see here. I'm going to let up Yeah Boy Ron, and then I'll get to KB, and we'll get that going. Yeah Boy Ron, what's going on? Hey, Andy, I'll let you up in a sec. Hey, what's up?
Yo, how you doing?
Good. Just another day here talking college football.
Nice.
Love it.
I just wanted to say, whoever mentioned that Illinois thing, I can't wait for that to be like Aflac trivia one day on like week 8 when they give you like the real tough ones that no one knows. That's going to be a great question on there.
Which stadium was on fire briefly this
Yeah, it's like on the 34th anniversary of the last time it caught fire. This stadium caught fire again. What is it?
Oh, that would be so
It's going to be great. Yeah, just keeping it short because I haven't really been following college football too much the past few weeks. I've been like super busy with life. But Rutgers is 4-1, guys. We could go bowling. Indiana and Michigan State are 2 winnable games for us right now. And
Rutgers has climbed up. I agree.
Like we really we still suck. Like objectively, we're still not a good team. But compared to where we were 2 years ago, like we made some really good progress. I feel like I don't dread watching our games now is the big thing.
I love that because that's how a team builds, especially for those who've been fans of teams that continuously struggle. And this is exactly the kind of process we had the last time Shiano was there. I mean, people forget. I mean, granted, Rutgers was arguably worse when he got there the first time. I remember the team that he inherited and how, it was just a struggle to get even a win in a season. But, this is the kind of gradual climb you see from him. I mean, I'm not saying you can't expect as direct a flight. It kind of will plateau and then move up and then plateau and move up. And next thing you know, he'll get a consistent bowl team. And this season, I mean, it seems plausible. I agree. Michigan State at Indiana, Iowa, unfortunately, because they lost their QB for the season. And we'll see. And even a team, and I'm not saying, I mean, we'll see how Maryland looks good at 5-0. They're beating up the teams they're supposed to, but is Maryland going to be a team that just sort of burns out in the second half of the season. We're going to see like
of the good teams on their schedule. If we were to beat any of them, it would be Maryland. But I'm not holding my breath. Like we're not beating Ohio State. We're not beating Penn State. So if we're going to beat a decent team,
Wisconsin was going to be interesting this weekend. I'm actually curious to see how they line up against Wisconsin because the Scotties have been good, but we'll see. I mean, that would be one where they could differentiate themselves rather than trying to hold themselves up against Michigan, which is a tough order right there.
But yeah, I'm excited, man. I feel like this year, I feel really good about going to a bowl game. It has me excited for next year. Maybe we can go 7-5. Break 500 would be massive.
That would be great. Rutgers is fun when Rutgers is out there. I mean, I remember when they had that 11-win season. I vividly remember that, and it was just it was fun because everyone likes seeing a team that doesn't typically do great.
Yeah,
have a good season.
My first college football game was actually it was pandemonium at Piscataway when we kept Louisville out of the championship. That one year was that 2008.
Oh, I remember that game. I watched that one on TV.
Yeah,
that was wild.
I was like maybe 8 years old when I was it? No, I was 10. I was 10 years old that game.
God, I feel old.
Well, thanks for taking my call. Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, man. Thanks for joining us. Let's see here, Andy. I'm going to let you back up. Sorry about that confusion earlier. Let's see if we can get you unmuted and we can hear you. So let's see here, Andy. When you get a chance, hit unmute and love to talk to you. Still can't hear you. All right. We'll see what's going on there. I'm going to let up KB and we'll see what happens there. But I apologize, Andy. I'm having trouble getting, I don't seem to be able to hear you. KB, I can hear you, KB. Yeah, sure can.
4 undefeated matchups upcoming this week. UK, Georgia.
Oh wait, Andy, we can hear you, so be patient. Whatever you did, I heard your mic come alive. So just be patient 1 second. I'll get to you, I promise. Go ahead, KB. Sorry about that.
So there's 4 undefeated matchups this week. There's Kentucky, Georgia, obviously Red River rivalry, Maryland, OSU, and Oregon, Washington, plus a couple that'll be, one undefeated team, one really difficult team with LSU, Missouri, and Notre Dame, Louisville. Do you think there's going to be any surprises in any of those games? I mean,
well, I just want to say, Oregon, Washington is actually, I believe, the following.
Oh, is it?
I think they.
Oh, okay, never mind.
All of that said, I mean, there's potential for some upsets. Georgia feels like it's playing a little bit too close to its
especially
opponents.
Auburn.
Yeah, and so I've heard some analysis that Kentucky seems to be designed to take advantage of a team the way Georgia looks now. And of course, Georgia could very well turn on a dime and do the Alabama thing. And Alabama seems to have suddenly become crazier week after week.
It's also in Athens, so
that Texas. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm hesitant. Maybe if we were in Lexington, I would exactly give Kentucky more of an edge, but I'm curious to see that one, but I'm still leaning towards Georgia. Cause I mean, good teams win and, they'll have a guy like a Brock Bowers who just lights everything on fire and wins the game. I mean, so it is still Georgia, and I give them some credit there. With some of these other games, I'm not sure which one I would go with. I mean, Maryland at Ohio State. It's at Ohio State. I know Maryland's looked pretty solid, but
I'd love for the Terps to win, but I can't see it happening.
It's so funny too. We've got a couple of these games where if at least one of the underdogs wins, it's going to just turn into like people are going to go bonkers for that team. So the potential's out there. And yeah, Louisville and Notre Dame. Oh my goodness. So Louisville, it's hard to peg them. They're where they're at, but we had a reporter at their game at North Carolina State, and it was just closer than I think we were expecting. And I mean, now that at least they've broken into the top 25, because at first I was curious about them, but then as the weeks have progressed, that opening week close victory versus Georgia Tech looks miserable because Georgia Tech looks just absolute garbage. And then, you get a touchdown win against Indiana. Again, Indiana's ended up being terrible. And in Boston College, sure, they put a scare in Florida State, but I mean, they just haven't really played anybody. And Notre Dame clearly is, at least, even in a loss, played really well. And then took care of Duke in an interesting matchup last weekend.
I mean, if they knew how to count.
Yeah, they did. Suddenly, amazing how it was a teachable moment. But at this point, yeah, it's. I don't. If Louisville manages to beat Notre Dame, I mean, granted, it's at home, so that helps. That would be strong. But yeah, exactly. We've got these matchups, and I'm just not sure that Washington Oregon game when it does get played, that one's going to be particularly interesting because that one certainly is gonna do a lot, and that's on the 14th. So that also
Okay,
that same
yeah.
weekend we're getting Miami
Do
and
they
North
both have a
Carolina.
bye?
Oregon has a bye, and I'm trying to
Because
remember
I
if
was looking at the NCAA website, and it
yeah, they
says
both have
both of the
buys.
yeah.
It's great. Literally both teams have buys for what should be. I mean, I would not be. I mean, that seems to be primed for game day. You're going to have two
Yeah, I mean that's
undefeated
awesome.
teams, top 10, and game day can go to Seattle. Oh my goodness, that'll be fun.
Just
Hopefully
a
it doesn't.
regular Big Ten conference game.
Oh, not only that, could you imagine because Seattle has Wazoo fans. They are going to be there. They're if they do that, that would maybe be the one thing that hesitate. The Wazoo fans are going to because they're one of my favorite rivalries this season has apparently been this new one between Pat McAfee and Wazoo. I never thought that would be a rivalry, but it apparently exists because I'm not sure what Pat's trying to do here. I'm not sure if they're feeding him things like, or maybe he's listening to side conversations behind the scenes where they're getting annoyed that Wazoo keeps, and Jake Dicker keeps blaming ESPN, which is partially to blame. I'm not saying that they're scot-free here, but it seems like Pat just like heard that stuff and decided, oh, I could just say it out loud. And there's a back and forth there. It keeps going on. So yeah, if game day ends up in Washington for that game, that is going to be a crowd to watch. That is
I think it kind of
absolutely
has to. Like,
yeah. Yeah, there aren't many. I mean, if they pick North Carolina with Miami, that means they're trying to avoid it in my mind because the bigger
yeah,
game is going. It's. I mean, we know for a fact those teams are going to go in undefeated because they have no game this week. So that would be a compelling one to see. But those two games next week are the ones I'm more interested because they feel like there's more. There are two teams that really have if not equals. There's certainly two teams that are more curious because I think again, North Carolina and Miami and Washington, Oregon. Those two games the following week are going to be a little more compelling than these undefeateds this week because they feel like what we got just this past weekend with Texas and Kansas, and of course the Red River rivalry this weekend. Sorry, that one's going to definitely put one team in the pole position to win
it
out
feels
and get that.
it feels kind of like that one's just all Texas though. Just looking at
I've
how
watched enough
they've
of
been
those
playing.
games to know that if I say that, you're just going to watch some wildly unexpected results. I mean, yes, Oklahoma's, Gifford was out last season for the Red River rivalry, but no one expected a
It's
shutout.
it's not going to be 49-0 just from one player.
Yeah, so I think I agree. Texas seems to be favored, but I am not going to be foolish enough to call that a guarantee. Not in that game. Those two teams are going to be. First of all, it's going to be entertaining. It should be more. Well, certainly more than last season. But yeah, this should be that. This is actually a really compelling one, and we're going to learn a lot. And Texas. I mean, Oklahoma is the one that needs to prove itself more. Texas, I mean, that game against Alabama each week seems stronger, but it'll be really interesting to see how Oklahoma does. And I think Oklahoma fans in general should be happy, at least, with Brett Venables this season. I mean, this is looking good. I mean, last season feels more like an aberration with how abrupt that changeover was and him having to come in after Lincoln bolted and took some of the best offensive tools out of the cupboard. But now OU is starting to look like OU. And I'm really curious to see how they line up against Texas.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much. Let's see here. Andy, you've been super patient. I heard you got that mute issue to work. So go ahead and unmute. Love to hear from you.
All right. Sorry about that.
No, it happens. Don't worry about it. Say, we literally have had guests come up, and it's really awkward when they don't know you have to use your phone. I still remember we had someone, and it was the guy was big enough that we had to go through his people. And his people forgot to tell him he had to be on a phone. So we figured out that he was listening on his computer and trying to unmute and couldn't figure out how to join. And we literally were like not hearing him. We were just saying out the instructions. We're like, okay, if you can hear us, you got to load it up on the Twitter app on your phone. And then you got to hit request. So things happen. But what's going on, Andy? What's on your mind?
Now the whole, you'd think you'd be able to use it on your laptop or computer.
You would. I talked to a developer at because Reddit tried to make a version of this, and that's the whole reason we started these talks. They were originally on Reddit. And then we weren't happy with how unstable it was. So we decided, well, they're taking Twitter's idea. We have a Twitter account. Why don't we put it on here? But talking to the Reddit devs, and that was interesting because the devs are the ones that do all this. They like apps because it's stable. They know exactly what they're getting. You can design something not to be flexible to every, to Google Chrome or Safari or Microsoft Edge or Firefox if people still use it. So the app thing is more stable in the sense that they can plan for it more. But I wish they would connect it to the laptop. I mean, they can do it. It certainly can be done, and Reddit even eventually worked it out.
Yeah, you're right. They just don't want to deal with the issues, and I don't blame them. So what I was gonna talk about was Wazoo and OSU possibly getting an auto bid for the playoff.
Oh, you mean next season?
Yeah.
When we get, I'm starting to feel that's not going to, I mean, I don't think that's going to happen for some reasons. It seems like, from what I heard, I believe it was Mike Oresco, the American, went along with this idea that's because the question is, what do you do with the original? Because as soon as the Pac-12 broke apart, we were going to be heading into next season and the season after that with this 12-team playoff, and it was already planned as an initial 2 years, see how they go, and move from there. And it was going to be 6+6, the 6 top conference champions, which implicitly means the P5 and the top finisher among the G5, and then 6 auto bids. So the question once the Pac-12 imploded was what do we do? What do we do next? And so there were 2 schools of thought that have been most popular. The SEC floated 12 at-large teams, which didn't go far because that immediately got the pushback from the G5 programs. But it seems to be, and this is where mentioning Mike Oresco comes in, there seems to be a good support for what's called now the 5+7 model, where it's going to be the 4 surviving P4, or however you want to call it, the Big 2 and the other 2, Big 10, SEC, ACC, and Big 12, plus one of the remaining champs, and then 7 at-large teams. It's going to be interesting. I think we're still going to see we still need some further resolution. There's no way the Pac-2 can survive just as 2 teams. It's not practical. Whether they backfill or do a reverse merger or whatever you want to throw at it, it's going to probably end up qualifying as what we used to call a G5, whatever we're going to call it in the future. So I'm not sure realistically that it's going to. It's fun to imagine, though, if somehow the Pac-12 figures out, they hire a lawyer that works out no, for the next couple of years, you got to let us in, our winner in. But practically speaking, it's going to be a question. Now, again, a wild scenario that popped in my head, not even that wild, reading about what was going on this week with Clemson, making some rumors coming out of Clemson that they are truly getting ready to depart the ACC, along with Florida State and potentially North Carolina, and the strength in numbers approach would mean suddenly the ACC needs a couple of more teams, and having just let in Stanford and Cal, suddenly you got 2 teams out west that would be travel partners, and you're trying to backfill with some decent enough quality without necessarily jumping to a G5 program, although SMU certainly was the ideal one because they were willing to basically just forego money and tap into that famous cash register of theirs for something different than a Trans Am. But that might be something that ends up happening. I could see that being that idea of a I wouldn't call it a happy ending, but kind of a surprise ending to that saga has now popped in my head, because if you have Clemson Fresno State, Florida State depart, then what 2 teams are ready and available and are the closest to being P5 programs? They are P5 programs. You'd suddenly have Wazoo and Oregon State out west. So I don't know if that's where it would go, but that certainly doesn't seem outside of the realm of possibility, especially after the ACC was willing to look that far west. But we'll see. And then the Apple Cup suddenly becomes a Big 10 ACC matchup, as well as the Civil War, although I know they don't like to call it that anymore. But whatever, I still call it the Civil War with the Ducks and the Beavs. But let's see here. I see Jason wants to join us as well. I'm going to go ahead and let you up. Thank you so much for your patience, everybody. It's great talking to you here on a wonderful Tuesday night in the middle of the season. So, Jason, what's on your mind?
Hey, what's going on, man? I know you're running up on time here, so I'll be quick. You mentioned it a little bit touch and go earlier about a game next week, but a question that I kind of wanted to bring, and if you brought this up already, I'm sorry. I kind of bounced in late. I was asked this question today, and only really one team came to mind. It's like the question that was asked to me was, who is a team that absolutely no one on earth is talking about right now that could potentially break into the playoff, and why is it Miami?
I love it. Miami was the one that jumped into my head
Yeah.
too, because their schedule is such that we're not going to get really a good look. I mean, in 2 weeks, we're going to see that game with North Carolina.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be an interesting one. And if they can win that, suddenly I think we're going to hear more of those stories about Miami, because then the future of their schedule, you're going to get some good games with, well, really at the back end, because it's Clemson. They totally missed Florida State. I didn't even, no, wait, I'm looking at, I'm sorry. Yeah, so then you get the games at, if they beat North Carolina, they host Clemson, and then they're at Florida State. And we'll see if Louisville's still looking, undefeated, or at least close enough to be a ranked challenger. But then suddenly they've come into attention. But yeah, they've been just quietly, despite being Texas A&M, and granted, Texas A&M, you hear some thoughts that Texas A&M is potentially one of those teams that could win the division, because again of how seemingly wide open the SEC is. If Texas A&M keeps winning, that initial win suddenly looks a lot. That win that kind of got forgotten looks a lot better on Miami's resume. But yeah, they're kind of operating under the radar, and I don't think they mind.
Yeah, no doubt. And that a couple of things about them that last year, it's funny that we've gone from last season. I bet the house on Florida State beating Miami, and it was a huge line. And my buddy was like, "It's not enough. Just bet it, and they'll crush them." And they did. And here we are a year later, and I don't know that there's a team in recent memory that I feel has improved more along the lines of scrimmage than Miami. Like, they physically dominated Texas A&M up front the whole game, and Tyler Van Dyke looks like 2021 Tyler Van Dyke now.
Yeah, he looks great. He is actually probably one of the least talked about quarterbacks, because so much of what's going on in the Pac-12, and then obviously Ewers at Texas. I mean, it's kind of been a distraction, but he's been up there with the top quarterbacks, I think.
Yeah.
As well as like Jaden Daniels and JJ McCarthy and the folks in the other conferences as well. But really, I think that's and strong quarterback play is where a great team comes out of, and they are just looking stunning right now. And it makes you wonder, was last year just an aberration because it was the first season, new head coach, the coordinators didn't work out, and then just it took a bit of a hiccup, and boom, here we are.
Well, I think it's just the lines of scrimmage. Cristobal, I mean, he's a big lineman guy. He recruited animals up there at Oregon, and that's why Lanning still has good linemen at Oregon. Is because
absolutely. That's actually a huge point. I just want to say I love that point, but keep going.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I mean, he recruits big freaks up front and gets dudes in the transfer portal who can play up front. And so I guess I shouldn't have been surprised as much as I was when I watched them play Texas A&M. I was like, my God, these guys are animals. They're pushing people around. And here we are. I mean, North Carolina, they're not terribly dominant up front. They played really well against South Carolina. So I'm kind of sitting here wondering, like, man, Florida State may end up being really the only team that can match up with Miami up front when they play them in the ACC. So I don't know. I'm certainly not a Miami fan, but it kind of came to my attention today that nobody, and I do mean no one, is talking about Miami. So just wanted to bring that up, and thanks for having me.
No, thanks, Jason. And I the more I think about that connection with recruiting on the line, and especially because Dan Lanning's a great coach in his own right, but that was what struck everybody about what happened to Colorado a few weeks ago, is they just got destroyed by that line. And that's a line that had matured because Mario Cristobal had been recruiting those guys to the team. And yeah, maybe that's it, because I think certainly last year there was a lot of Schadenfreude, and people were just, were not happy with Cristobal and the way he left Oregon. But This might be the season where he shows that he can coach and gets the U. Because when the U gets good, they get exciting, they get funky, and goodness, if we get a real good showdown at Florida State with Miami and Florida, that'll be. I can't remember the last time. I mean, I remember when that was the game to watch, or one of the games to watch of the season. But it's been a while, and I think it'll be fun for. I don't even want to say newer fans, but fans in the last however many years since both teams have looked like this is going to be a deciding game. That's going to be a fun one. It would be neat if that happened. A lot of football would be played in between, so I'll just say that. But gosh, that would be a fun one. So let's see. We've gone for about an hour. Ideally, I like to wrap after about an hour. Last week went so long because it's funny. It takes forever to then like transfer files and get things up because we like to put this up wherever you can get podcasts in case you missed it. And that's a bit of a process in and of itself because it isn't really naturally designed into Twitter/X or whatever you want to call it. But before we leave, I just wanted to also just touch on a few of these other kind of highlights. Again, that Oregon-Washington game, which is going to be on the 14th, they've apparently been willing to move it back. I mean, it's a 3:30 Eastern kickoff, but that's 12:30 Pacific, so they're willing to take that Big Ten special, and that'll keep it away from the USC Notre Dame game, which is going to be in the evening, and we'll see. That one could very well be interesting too. We'll see how those two teams do this week. And let's see here. I know we had a chance to touch on the Clemson thing. Again, going back to rivalries, talking about Wazoo versus Pat McAfee. The Lou Holtz Ryan Day thing kind of keeps going on in the background. Lou Holtz, I guess he's on some obscure poll that I guess brings in people who were members of the media or coaches. I'm not entirely sure, but in a somewhat petty move, he moved Ohio State down 5 spots in his poll. In again, utterly meaningless in the bigger thing of which polls are meaningful. It's somehow less meaningful than the coaches poll, but it was cute. Again, we're seeing movement with some of the recruiting, probably with some of the Heisman polls. Caleb Williams has climbed to the top of most of them, but the odds of winning 2 in a row is extremely low. I think we'll see another person rise, and I'm very much looking forward in that Pac-12 to see Penix, Bo Nix, and Caleb Williams all get a chance to square off against each other. That's going to be exciting. I see a couple of hands up. Before we take off, I'm not in a huge rush to end this. John, what's going on? I saw your hand up first, and we'll get to you. Yeah, boy, Ron.
Yeah, I just want to mention real quick because I think tonight's a very special night because this will be the last night of no football until November 22nd. So hope the rest of y'all are ready because we have 50 straight days of football coming up.
That is a great point. Tomorrow night, Wednesday night, we're going to get Jacksonville State with, again, they're new to FBS with Rich Rod at the helm against Middle Tennessee. And we're going to get FIU at New Mexico State. Are these Saturday level games? No, but are they Wednesday level games? You bet. It's again the glory. And this is because Conference USA's, when their new media deal agreed, they're going to play Wednesday night games. So that's going to free us up some Wednesday night football. Thursday night, we've got Sam Houston at Liberty. Liberty's got the easiest schedule in America by an order of magnitude. So don't be surprised if they go undefeated and we start hear Liberty fans talking about it. But literally, they are the 133 out of 133 ranked schedule. That was preseason. And it looks like that may have been a little bit strong because some of their opponents have just been miserable as the season has progressed. And we're going to get Western Kentucky at La Tech. What's up, yeah, boy, Ron?
Yeah, so what's actually going on between Lou Holtz and Ryan Day? I've been out of the loop for like 3 weeks, and all of a sudden I see so many people talking about this, and I can't tell if it's serious or if it's a joke.
Oh no, it's serious, and Ryan Day definitely made it serious. I'll do my best to just summarize it objectively. So Ryan Day, apparently earlier in the week, I forgot what show it was on. It was on some minor, it was a TV show. At least it was recorded. Lou Holtz basically did the classic Ohio State is not a physical team, and watch how they got pushed around by Michigan the last 2 years, yada yada yada. And Ryan Day, and I do listening to various analysis of this. I agree with the thought that Ryan Day decided all he could remember was Lou Holtz saying that, and it's a criticism that he clearly does not like, and he takes strong offense at it. And he cut, right after that tight win against Notre Dame, he cut what felt like a wrestling promo during the on-field interview, saying, Lou Holtz, I'll challenge you. But he was basically calling out Lou Holtz for saying that they're not a physical team. And then because of the broadcast rights, most TV networks couldn't use that clip. And he was asked again. So you tend to see the clip from the press conference because he was asked about it. And so during the press conference, he elaborated that he was just annoyed that Ohio State was being called that over the years. And certainly Ohio State showed that they could be physical against Notre Dame. But then Lou Holtz decided, I'm not going to back down at this. So he kind of doubled down. And then you get to game day. The game day crew defend their old friend from ESPN because some of those guys had either called games with him or, there's sort of some camaraderie between those guys who've somehow remained employed. I'm not saying that they deserve to be fired, but ESPN certainly laid off quite a few folks. So again, this tension keeps going on. And then again, so we get that petty decision by Lou Holtz to drop Ohio State. And again, in a meaningless poll here, we're not talking about a poll that's the AP or anything that will actually have some kind of consequence in where teams go. And, meanwhile, I think Ryan Day's mostly moved on. He had a kind of an awkward quote this past week. The most romantic thing I've done for my wife in the last few months is beat Notre Dame last Saturday night, which makes you kind of wonder. But, I get it. It's a busy lifestyle being an FBS coach. It's 24/7 football. So, it's tough
Bro,
on
that's
that.
weird. That's weird shit, bro. What the
That's
hell?
one of those things you say to your friends and they laugh, and you say it in public and it lands kind of funny. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt there, because when I heard that quote, it reminds me of some of the great quotes of great Brett Bielema. Where you kind of like, did he just say that for real? Sometimes these guys are paid to be head coaches. They're paid to be leaders of men, and all of these things. They're not necessarily paid to be quote machines that are smooth at every particular topic. Not everyone's Steve Spurrier, or Dion.
Somewhat related. There's that one coach, I forget his name. He's retired now at like some FCS school, and he would just always say the most out of pocket during the interviews on his way to the tunnel at halftime. I'll see if I can find the video for you guys. It's one of the funniest things ever.
Share that with me versus DM, and I'd love to share that. That would be great. Or just if you find it, tack it on as a reply to this, and people can come back and check it out.
Yeah, I will.
I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. This is our CFB Talk 160. Thank you all for listening. It's always great hearing from you. It's an exciting world in college football. We got another good week coming up. This October is going to be awesome, as it always is. So my name is Bobak Hayeri. On behalf of all of us, I'm going to hang up and listen.